Hey, everybody. Welcome to this episode of HITRUST Secrets, the show where we break down any questions that anybody has about HITRUST and try to figure out how we can make your compliance journey a little bit easier. So
Mm.
today, Donna and I are happy to be joined by Bill Deller. And Bill, I've introduced you, I think, on the LinkedIn post as a GRC expert. So if you want to give everybody your real title, and then we can start talking through how to prepare for success for a high trust compliance journey.
Sure. No, thanks, Susan, Donna, for having me. Yeah, I guess my more formal title is shareholder at Schneider Downs. I help lead the IT risk advisory practice at our firm, which includes high trust, third party, and SOC reports, to name a few.
Excellent. Well, we're very happy to have you. And I don't know if you had anything prepared to talk about, or we're going to have this as a free flow discussion, but either way works for us.
Got nothing prepared. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm a
perfect.
free flowing kind of guy. So,
All right. Well, so I guess probably let's talk about the first high trust certification that you were part of, and the kind of the lessons learned there, because that's kind of the premise of what we do, why we do what we do every week, which is what do I wish I knew about high trust, but either didn't know to ask or nobody remembered to tell me.
yeah, no doubt. We've been working within the high trust realm for almost a year now, 10 years now,
Yeah.
really when it came out. But we were doing the SOC 2 Plus high trust reports for a number of years before our client started to mature towards the certification. I think it was really when like the I1 and E1 certifications came out, as which we saw as like more of a direct competitor to the SOC 2 uh, and whatnot. But nonetheless, yeah, we've got a number of folks that now do the certifications at each level. Um, and yeah, when it comes to preparing for the certification, the policies and procedures are the first thing people, big gulp about, if you will, um, because of how prescriptive all the evaluative elements are.
Hmm.
Um, and actually, I'd say sometime in the late 2010s, we developed a templated policy and procedure library that maps to all the CSF at the time. Now there's so many tools and toolkits that make those templates available that we didn't keep them updated. So they map to like a version 9 of the CSF at the time. But that's the first thing that I think is the hardest for folks to wrap their head around, because if you don't have some of the language teed up specifically as much as the evaluative elements are specified, you're going to get a finding, right? And a couple too many of those, and you could not pass your cert, right?
Exactly. Yeah, and I think it was funny because, when I first started with High Trust, we were so focused on the implementation that we were like, of course we've got to have a policy and procedure. And there was a lot more leeway to have an ad hoc policy or procedure. And now it's very specifically looking for that exact control language, almost for it feels redundant, kind of going through some of those policies. But I tell people as I'm creating policies for them is, you can't just say, okay, here's our policy, here's our evidence, because the next step then is, well, now we're going to look at how you've implemented that specific piece. And you're right, there's
Mhm.
very prescriptive things in there,
Yeah.
and it can take people by surprise to say, oh, I didn't know I needed that in there. And you're like, well, your policy stated it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because High Trust has changed their tone a bit on how they want to see policies and procedures over the years. Because at one point in time, this is going back quite a while at this point, they didn't want the exact language from the control. They would actually push
Hmm.
back on that and say it seems too generic. This doesn't look like something from your organization. It just looks like something that could be anywhere. So that doesn't meet our needs. And now they've gone almost completely the other way and they want their exact language, but that's really more in the policy, and the procedure has to align very tightly with the evidence you provide. So if you say
Yeah.
we do it this and this and this in your procedure, your evidence better back that up.
And that evolution, cracks me up And at the same time, it makes sense because they realized that the gray area grew over time.
Hmm.
They're like, well, all right, now we just got to back to the prescriptive language. I'm like,
Hmm.
that's exactly what you have to have. So
Hmm.
yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, I think they didn't want to leave things up to interpretation because, I may look at a policy and go, "Yeah, you've got that general meaning there," and then somebody else would look at it and go, "No, it's definitely not the way we're expecting it to be." And yeah, Donna, I think the procedures are the more difficult piece of it.
Hmm. Yeah.
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 And high trust recognize that because if I remember the breakdown correctly, it's policies 10%, procedure is 15, and then implementation is 40. So they're
40.
recognizing that it's more important to have those procedures so that other people can know. Well, first off, I think it helps that you have as an organization synthesized that policy into, okay, here's how I'm going to be able to show this and implement this control
Right.
as a procedure.
Yeah. I believe there was a point in time for R2 certifications where as long as you were 100% on policy and procedure, you could fail every implemented and still get the cert. That has since changed, despite the fact that like there are certain evaluative elements and control requirements that are essentially the policy and procedure. So those excluded, because then you have to have those implemented, if right.
Hmm.
But otherwise, like we that used to shock us. Not that anyone's ever using that as their aim necessarily. So, but things have changed more in that regard for
Yeah.
the better. Yeah.
So you said that you started out doing the SOC Plus High Trust, and I know that was popular for a little while. Where I was, we could never do it because we could never get things to sit still long enough, and so our scope for our SOC was always going to be different than our scope for our high trust
Mm.
assessments. So where do you see that now? Do you see a lot of that, or do you kind of is it really they people implement both, but not as a combined assessment, or is it really people are picking one lane or the other?
Great question. Yeah, we're typically seeing one way or the other. Um, but we do have folks that do both. And if so, if they have to do the cert, then they're skinnying down their SOC report almost to be like a SOC 1 report in some cases. If not, just being the bare minimum of the SOC report to satisfy those third-party requests. But by and large, everything that you'd want in the SOC 2 is in the E1 cert. Um, by and large. There's only 44 control requirements in the E1, but it
Hmm.
adds up to like 100 and what 6 or 7 odd evaluative elements, and that's more than what would be in the standard typical SOC report, SOC 2 Type 2 report. So yeah, it definitely is more consumed by the E1 certification, but we still do a good amount of the plus reports, frankly, to avoid having to pay all of the astronomical MyCSF fees, right? When you have to pay 20 to 30 grand a year in subscription fees for a platform that a lot of folks still try to circumvent,
Yeah.
then it doesn't
It's
make a
not
ton of
great.
sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Has a
and
lot to be desired functionality wise, and user experience wise.
yeah, yeah, and I mean I've been a high trust cheerleader for a number of years now, but
Hmm.
we go back and forth on the pros and the cons, and there's
Hmm.
obviously still a lot of pros. The governance that it has right now next to the AICPA is night and day, and I know the
Yeah.
AICPA is attempting to do something to bring that up to the times, which
Hmm.
is not super public knowledge as of now, but there that'll come in due time. But I don't know at what pace that'll
Yeah.
happen. Whereas High Trust already has that really figured out.
They do. I've got a question though about you. You said using SOC Plus so they can circumvent my CSF. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because that's not
Sure.
something that I would have thought about. I enjoy enjoy using my CSF so that I can play with different assessment objects in advance, on behalf of my clients so that we're not walking into something going, well, we think it's going to be this and this, and it's volume wise, it's different because that enables us to run and compare and do very, specific if we can try and clone it. I know you can't, I've discovered recently, you can't clone from an R2 to go to an E1 or an I1, which is sad,
Hmm.
but true. Um,
Right.
but I'm just curious about how you use the SOC 2 to help with that.
Yeah, good point. And most of the folks that all of the folks doing SOC 2 plus high trust reports aren't doing R2s. If you're going to
Hmm.
go the R2 route, the SOC report reporting framework really doesn't work for you anymore. So they are E1s. It's a static
Hmm.
control set. We know exactly what the evaluative elements and requirements are. Um, and that would be a second matrix, if you will, in section 4 of the report. Previously, and actually still, the only mapping that's made available where the AICPA worked with HITRUST is for these like 75 odd control numbers that they mapped between the SOC 2 2017 trust service criteria and the HITRUST version.
Hmm.
No additional mappings have been made available because they've sort of parted ways a little bit, but nonetheless they honor that mapping. But that's where we said, like, that's so outdated. We just use the E1 as the secondary control matrix for the SOC 2 plus. But in terms of folks that, like, if you wanted to do SOC 2 plus R2, like, there's not really any reason you couldn't. Circumventing MyCSF, like, we still as authorized assessors have a number of high trust assessments that we can use as a playground and scoping mechanism. I was using one this morning, if you will, just so that I could see exactly which requirements mapped out
Hmm.
based on scoping and technical factors. And then I
Hmm.
know and I can export what those controls are, still test everything in our work paper management system, and you never have to use MyCSF.
So you don't submit or anything using
No,
MyCSF?
not with a SOC 2 plus report. No, it never goes to high trust whatsoever. That's what I mean by the governance
Oh,
function
okay.
is then governed by the ASCPA, right? That
Okay,
is
so that's
not,
it's just fundamentally not a high trust
no,
report or evaluation. Okay.
right. Yeah, it's purely an attestation report from the AICPA, and high
Hmm.
trust provides us as authorized assessors the license, if you will, to perform that plus report. Um,
Okay.
but they don't review, a sample of testing or controls and whatnot like they
Okay.
would as part of a certification.
Yeah. And in line with some of the efforts that AICPA is putting forward to kind of um, tighten up their reviews and because right now, SOC 2s, generally speaking, are only recognized as good as the assessors who provide them. So if you know the assessor and you're like, this is a great firm, worked with them for years, very buttoned up, you can have a lot of confidence in that. Whereas other firms, if it's a one-off situation or a pop-up consultant or something, people might be a little bit more probably correctly hesitant to just take it
Yeah.
as that's strong evaluation. But more so since High Trust published the breach rate, do you know if AICPA is working towards any sort of an evaluation on what their breach rate might be?
Not that I'm aware of. And I know
Mm,
Hydrus puts a lot of cards in that 0.64 or whatever it
yeah.
is now. Um, but nonetheless, yeah, I don't know if the ICPA is doing anything related to using that as a factor as an assessment factor. I,
Okay.
I would bet too that they won't, purely
Mm,
because there's the strength in the SOC report is also its downfall, which is its flexibility. Because SOC 2 is a
yeah.
reporting framework, right? So they can basically say whatever framework you want us to be will be within the confines of our reporting framework, right? Because
Hmm.
technically they could say, yeah, we're 0.64 as long as you use these controls from the R2 or these controls from the I1, and you get a qualified assessor to do it. But yeah, that's, I think, few and a little far-fetched to say
Mhm.
they'd use that anytime soon.
Okay.
But yeah, I could go on and on about the peer review programs too. So
Well, getting back to your first high trust assessment as an organization, you've looked at your policies, you've synthesized those with the controls that are going to be part of your assessment with high trust. What do you kind of see as the places that most organizations kind of fall or don't realize, that I mean, I think every compliance framework is going to look at risk management, for example. And so there, you've got those broad strokes, but where do you see kind of the lack of planning coming into play for an organization that this is their first time into high trust?
yep, hands down, change management. Um, because of the nature in which a lot of these under under 300 person health tech firms operate. They don't document everything to the extent that an auditor is going to need it, right? And you can only pass controls in which you're able to prove everything in which you're doing. And there are so many requirements within change management. When we sample everything, that there needs to be details within the tickets, right? There's only so much within a default pull request that we'll be able to see and grab ourselves. A lot of that, you can't follow the story of the change as well if you don't have a little bit of ad lib within the tickets. So that's one of the biggest factors for us that we're coaching folks throughout the readiness process to do, and to implement in advance of the incubation period, right? Which is obviously another tricky concept for folks initially, but usually catch on pretty quick.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was going to think that audit logging would be another place that people are not sure where their logs are, what they should be logging, what kind of scrutiny it's going to come to. But yeah, I do agree that especially a small organization, I'm working with one that's like, well, we no longer have our cab because two people left the company. And I was like, but you're not just putting changes into production without testing them and without having an approval. And like, oh no, we're doing that. It's just very ad hoc. And I was like, and email, just have an email that says, I've reviewed this. Here's our rollback plan. If it doesn't work, here's who's going to test it. Like that is sufficient for change management as an interim thing until you get back to a more formal change advisory board type of role. But yeah, for a small company, it can be very difficult because they think they need all this formal stuff and they really just need to document what they're doing a little better. It makes it more difficult, when you say, "Hey, give me a list of all your changes for the last year," if they're not in some sort of a repository, but at least they've got the documentation that goes, okay, well, I had to manually pull together a list of changes, but now that I've got the list of changes, we did have rollback, we did have approval, we did look at the risk of, whatever this change was.
Yeah, a good SharePoint form can solve that. You can even PDF an email and attach it as
Exactly.
documentation.
Yeah.
And that's where I really encourage a lot of those smaller clients because, if you've got a company that's 50 people or less, the level
Mhm.
of circumstance required is not the same. You don't need a full-on ticketing system for everything. Your board can be 3 people that meets, every other week or once a month or, just as needed. But I agree. There are definitely people who get a little shell shocked or, you know, apprehensive about how formal they need to be.
Mhm.
And while I encourage them to drag it out of email only because that gets lost so easily and it's so hard to find what you're looking for when you need it. And then somebody leaves or somebody goes on vacation and you've not got access to all the stuff you needed. And, it's hard, but, just trying to get it out of there so that you've got a little formality, but the light version.
Yeah. It's a great point. And we've had clients do just exactly that too. Build their own SharePoint site and
Yep.
repository to not not just for us, but for them, right?
Mm-hmm.
In order to operate and maintain controls. And some of them also use like the toolkits, the automated GRC tools that are out there, like
Hmm.
Drata, Vanta, Hyperproof, etc. Right? They're all adding HITRUST modules, if you will, now. Um, but nonetheless, the SharePoint site still works really well. Um, and when you
I'm
said
seeing
the
a
Outlook,
product that we can create, Donna. We'll do like
It's
a SharePoint interface template and just here you go.
yeah,
seriously,
it's so easy, and most companies already have it because they already pay for Microsoft, so they
Yeah.
don't need to pay for anything
You'll
yeah,
else.
do it in Microsoft and SharePoint. I'll do a Google Docs type of
Okay,
and
that's
we'll
good
do
because
some forms in.
I'm
Yeah.
not a Google
Okay.
Docs.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
we'll
like I'm
monetize
not
it.
Google
Yeah.
Docs compatible. I like SharePoint.
Well,
I can't
it's a
think of
lot more versatile. There's a lot more that you can do with it.
Hmm.
true. But I couldn't think of any of my new E1, I1 clients that would not pay for something like that because the man hours that they put into it to have to build that and
Mhm.
customize that, yeah, that template would go a long way.
Mhm.
Um,
Cool. All right.
but
Okay.
we
Notes for next
typically
time.
Useful.
live,
Yeah.
we always live on the certifying external side, so we're like, we
Mhm.
can't do that for you.
Yeah.
We can tell you how to do it, but we can't do it for you.
Well, and that's where Sue and I have, found a lot of a gap in, those clients that are seeking high trust certification. And while we come at it from slightly different perspectives, because Sue, I think you help with readiness in a more formal capacity, whereas I am, I'll come in and I'll help, I can help build SharePoint bits or map policies and procedures to controls, take a look at evidence and go, right, okay, you're missing some of these things, not in a formal readiness
Mm,
capacity, but really just kind of making sure process wise and
right.
project management wise, they're ready for what's coming down. And then I actually will sit in-house with the clients and project manage the entire assessment, whether
Yeah.
they're looking at, I have done E1s. It's not usually what I'm called in for because they're small. But, right up to 800 and 1,000 controls when they get excited and they add on other bits or they're required to. And it's just kind of making sure that the clients can breathe and follow through on what they need to do without getting completely overwhelmed by the volume.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Sue and I will go in and do those things specifically because neither of us are assessors.
Right.
And Sue, jump in if anything changes on your end and I've got that wrong. But I'm not an assessor. I'm not pursuing an assessor license. I deliberately go in to partner with clients in a way that assessors can't. They need to keep that arm's length distance. And so I jump in as an intermediary expert of sorts to help guide that process. And I'm absolutely called in by assessors who are like, I have a client who needs help. I'm not allowed. Who can do this?
Yeah.
So those are things that Sue and I both offer to clients. And we found that we are anomalies a bit in the high trust realm because we don't fit neatly into the existing buckets of client or assessor. So I don't
Yeah.
know if you've
So
come
many
across
assessors.
those forms where it's like, are you a client or an assessor? I'm like, no.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I know. And I usually put client because that's more the space that I play as far as
Yeah.
readiness. But I agree
Yeah.
because Bill, you've got the ability to oh, I can just go in and do a test assessment and take a look at this versus both Don and I are have to go, okay, client, do you have a subscription? How many assessment objects do you have? Let's go in and
Mhm.
use one of your assessment objects to kind of see, what's important and what's not. And we don't
Mhm.
have a play space to be able to check what from this version to that version or from this assessment object type to another, what those
Mhm.
ramifications are. So we kind of have to wait for
Mhm.
the client to have it or a validated
Yeah.
assessor that we work with that can give us a demo object
Right.
at some point and then take it
Mhm.
away.
Yeah.
Yes. We used to do that longhand where like,
Oof.
yeah, try to figure out the scoping factors and then back end which requirements, which was, yeah, never, if I never do that again,
No, that's the
I'll be
HITRUST
all right.
secret sauce. I mean, that's kind of what their proprietary is to take a look at all that. So I always know
Yeah.
that's up completely up to them, and they're going to guard that. I remember they used to have reports that would go through like all the different mappings, and I don't think those are available to download anymore because I think so many people were taking advantage of that. And then, I know an organization I worked at before, there was a lot of different systems that were SOC 2, and we were trying to map from SOC 2 to HITRUST so we could kind of
Mhm.
see how we could
Mhm.
bridge that. And that was a very valuable but manual exercise that we had
Yeah.
done to say, okay, this trust principle relates to this high trust control or set of controls and be
Right.
able to map
Yeah.
it that way.
Yeah.
So,
They might want to think about sharing a little bit more though, because with all of the AI tools out today, people can figure that out pretty quickly. So if it's
yeah,
not easily available through high trust, people will find other means.
yeah.
Not saying I know of anything in particular. I'm just saying it's possible.
Sure.
So I know high trust, their thought is people will start with an E1, move to an I1, and then move to an R2 eventually. Do you see that with your clients? Is that kind of how you advise them if they're brand new to it and just go, hey, get your feet wet with an E1, or kind of where do you start them and kind of what questions do you ask for them to figure out where they are and what they need?
Yeah, this is great. I feel like everything we're talking about, I've talked about like earlier today. Um, Almost all of our clients that start with E1 then go right to the R2. They skip the I1 entirely because it's like you jumping from 44 to 182 control requirements. What's an extra like 50 to 100 with the amount of leniency that you get as part of the R2?
Mhm.
Certainly an added cost from the perspective of you have to test policy and procedure. So from an external assessor, it's a little bit more expensive, but in year two, you only have to test 40 controls versus the 60 plus in the I1. So it almost levels out. It's still a little bit more expensive, but most of them we were able to lay out the pros and the cons, and they like the opportunity to have scoring flexibility
Mhm.
in the scoring rubric, right? There's leniency in that scoring model with the R2 that you do not get with the I1, and they're all worried about getting through all the pain and suffering and then failing, which is
Mhm.
yeah, the worst thing that could happen. So that they realize that and have most often taken the opportunity to just jump to the R2 if they're going to take that leap of 140 plus control requirements anyway. And that is actually the way that we steer them if possible, because we don't want to have to get to that point and be, the grim reaper of a failed cert either, right?
Mhm.
So we like to have that extra control scoring leniency on our side too, because at the end of the day, we have to report objectively on what we see. We can prepare and help prepare and point them as much as possible, and folks, often think that auditors get paid in findings and we want to find control gaps and exceptions, but makes our life harder. We don't want that, right?
Yeah, those are always
So,
difficult conversations to have. To go, well, we thought you were good, but you didn't quite measure up to what we needed. And it is a higher level, because you're only looking at the implemented, it is like an 82 or an 85 that you have to score on each and every one versus you get a little more leniency and it's like 72 to 75 is really this, if I tell everybody if you're getting a 75, we're good. Um, and 72 we're still pretty, we're hitting the bar, we're clearing it still, but we're kind of scraping that bar. So but yeah, it's definitely a little more intimidating having that higher score to look at with an implementation only evaluation.
right, right. Yeah. Um,
Nice.
Do you find there's different style clients or size characteristics for different companies that are better suited to an E1, I1, R2?
sure, absolutely. I think as an E1 in the E1 phase, you can almost get away with your internal compliance lead at an organization that's not fully dedicated to it. As you get to the I1 and certainly the R2, there's more than likely a dedicated GRC type of individual or external firm like yourselves that would be partnering with them. The E1 SOC reports, like very often we can get away with working with the director of IT, engineering, etc. But once you get to be just a little bit more than that, they realize that they've got to pass that responsibility off to someone that's fully focused on it and giving it the time it deserves. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely
One,
challenging.
yeah,
I feel like there's still a lot of organizations that try and make high trust a part-time, or maintaining reports and certifications a part-time gig for somebody who has a vast majority of other responsibilities, and it fails time and again. The number of CISOs who've walked away in the middle of assessments, it's it's not as rare as one might hope.
Right. Yeah. Plus, there's just the opportunity cost for, executives and high level engineers of
Hmm.
what should they be doing that they're good at and that they enjoy. Like most
Yeah.
engineering and security people are not very passionate about risk compliance measures, right? So,
yeah. And it's hard if they've got operational responsibilities because that will always take precedence over your compliance responsibilities. And
Hmm.
until maybe those 2 weeks of interviews within the audit period, but otherwise it's, oh, I've got this to work on because, the patches are needing more of my attention, or I've got this security incident that I need to double check and see if it's truly an incident. And
Hmm.
those will always take the precedence over. Let me check that policy and procedure and make sure it's got all of those elements in there.
Yeah.
right, right.
But so, question on external inheritance. When do you have that conversation with your clients to say, hey, by the way, if you're using an already high trust certified entity for some of your infrastructure or some of your applications, that burden is taken off of you. And at what point do you kind of give them that information? And then how do you, as an assessor, determine how much of a percentage of an inheritance to push to that vendor?
Yeah. Um, soon as possible, sometimes within discovery calls, but certainly within scoping and planning, because it's a big piece of the scope. And we pride ourselves very much on trying to align scoping as closely as possible to what we have to do. We don't want to overcharge folks, and it's a pretty simple business. We charge based on our time and effort. And if we can be more efficient or decrease that effort, then we want to relay those discounts onto our clients. So it's a huge aspect, and we're often carving out third parties in the E1, I1. But in terms of the R2 assessments and certifications, we want to understand that as early as possible so that we can give them a better idea of the budget ultimately. Um, and how we decide on what that percentage is, our strategy is we tend to already know, having done enough of these, what each of the cloud providers um, are going to accept in terms of inheritance. But we really just go back to what's fair, right? Because we don't want them to deny it. If they deny too much, then we're at the end of we're getting close to reporting perhaps, and that could backtrack us on our timeline. So yeah, we really do try to be fair in how we calculate. We rely a little bit on what's been accepted in the past at this point, and then fluctuate based off of where our clients truly are performing the control versus not, and the CSP is doing the main function.
Yeah, because the full inheritance ones are easy because obviously, it's like, okay, great, I can get to up to 100%. Although I will back off of that if I do know that the client is doing some of that work, especially like
Right.
the disposal of assets. It's like, well,
Mm,
AWS isn't taking your laptops, and so
yeah.
that piece of it, yes, we can fully inherit, but we're not going to fully inherit. But the partial
Yeah.
inheritance, I mean, it can be anywhere from 10% to 90% in some cases. And it's sometimes very difficult to be able to judge what would be acceptable to that cloud provider for them to say,
Right.
yeah, I agree with you, or no, we're not taking more than 40% or something of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly. And I know and I've talked to other assessor firms that are like, we're going to ask for as much as we can, which is a strategy in and of itself, but you know, you don't want to upset the cloud provider too much because
Exactly.
then they're going to start pushing back on things that they wouldn't otherwise that
Exactly.
aren't truly fair. So
Right.
Mhm.
that's our approach is, yeah, do it right based off what truly is being leveraged and inherited by them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then one of the things I always do is then I set it and kind of forget it so that the client, I mean, something may be 90% handled and the client's not doing, for example, like assets. They maybe don't have any certificates of destruction because they're still holding on to those laptops and they haven't gone through that process yet, and I don't let them off the hook. I'm still like, well, you're going to need that certificate of destruction. You know, you better get that vendor lined up and all that. Knowing in the back of my head, oh, they're not going to worry about the high trust certification because that score is going to be fine. They're going to be 90% with their cloud provider, but I still want them to do the right thing, which I
Right.
think is another, that's sometimes where compliance programs get a bad rap because you're just looking for that score. And it's like, no, I'm looking to make sure you understand what you need to do and why you need to do it, regardless of whether you get a certification or not.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And that's why you can never talk GRC without the GR, right? So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
yeah.
Because and a lot of people do see it as a checklist, and that's an approach and a perspective that really grates on me, because it's not just a checklist. It is a checklist which is making it easy to follow through on the things which are fundamentally required to meet regulatory requirements for handling certain types of, data or controlled data sets. They're required in order to keep up with some of the cybersecurity risks and those types of things, and where people um, you know come across as, oh, it's just a checklist. It's a very lackadaisy attitude
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
they clearly do. And the worst situations are when I hear the leadership team, and I've heard CIOs talk about this, where it's like, oh, that's just a checklist approach. It's not doing anything. The checklist actually is backed up by quite a few things.
Oh my gosh. It's so true, Donna. I've almost come to the opinion, almost, that security practitioners claim compliance as a checkbox out of, a personal defensive mechanism, just like
Mhm.
psychologically, because it always does find something, right? So like it's a personal defensive mechanism to claim that security is paramount. Whereas, yeah,
Mhm.
it's an approach to
Mhm.
fully understand and be comprehensive. And at the end of the day, it's often not liked because we do find things, right? We we
Mhm.
we are able to see things under the covers that they get upset about because they otherwise wouldn't have been found.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think that's the hard part with high trust, and that's the intimidating is that you're being scored and judged and graded on that versus a traditional SOC 2 where it's okay, it's just something that we found and we're just going to write it in here and you're more than you're more than happy to be able to do a management response to it to say, yeah, found it, we're going to fix it versus high trust is, okay, when are you going to fix it? How are you going to fix it? And having somebody kind of look over your shoulder. And I'll tell people that I'll say, better to fix it now, especially in that pre-assessment, we know when we're kind of looking and
Yeah.
getting things ready, because then you're doing it on your schedule, as
Hmm.
opposed to if you wait till that certification window, then you're going to have high trust coming back to you in a year going, okay, how far did you get? What did you do? And then grading you on that. So I
Hmm.
think that's probably where a lot of people push back on that. They want to be able to maybe not worry about something or think about something. And now suddenly somebody's like, oh, you don't have an A+ here. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah. But it's only a B and that's okay. And we can get you back to an A+.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point. And that's in part why high trust is almost like defaulted for third party risk management,
Hmm.
whereas SOC 2 needs to be right sized within third party programs because they're all so different and need to be baselined based off of what the program is and what's within the report, because we're seeing such a wider and wider range of what is
Mm,
within the report. Whereas high trust is, you're getting what you get every single time, and you can
mhm.
hang your hat on it.
Mhm. So are you seeing when you do an E1, do you also put together like a combined assessment? So I know a lot of healthcare technology organizations will say, well, I just need an E1. And I kind of push back and go, well, you need an E1 plus HIPAA. And, that's instead of that 44 controls, you're probably about 100 controls, but then you can prove HIPAA compliance, and show that you're that due diligence for an OCR investigation or question that comes up.
Yep. Yeah. We do a little bit of both of
Okay.
those. Yeah, I think HIPAA adds what, like 54
Something like that. Yeah.
control requirements. So some folks see that, they're like, I'm going to double my overall assessment because of HIPAA. But a lot of folks do understand, the justification for that. What gets
Mm,
tricky when you explain how HITRUST was built, the original CSF, HIPAA is one of the five frameworks that it was built on, and now
Right.
it's like, oh well, the E1 doesn't have its standard. But nonetheless, yeah, a lot of folks still do add the HIPAA, at least security and breach. A lot of folks aren't covered entities that we're assessing as
Right.
health tech companies.
Yeah.
So yeah, that additional 54 almost doubles the effort there.
Yeah. And I think that might be for a healthcare technology or a business associate, that may be a good segue instead of going I1 to say, okay, well, let's start with an E1 and then let's do an E1 plus HIPAA. And then to your point, maybe then go up to an R2 if they even
Right.
need to, or do we stay E1 and HIPAA for forever? And
Yeah.
with that E1 HIPAA, you get that rapid reassessment in year two. So you do still have the benefit of not necessarily having to go through all 100 controls again. I don't know exactly how that maps out because I've not actually gone through a rapid reassessment for a combined assessment at this point, but I'll be curious to see how that would play out.
Yeah. Awesome.
But all right, well, we've got a couple more minutes left. Any gotchas, any, words of wisdom, anything that you kind of go, gosh, I wish somebody had told me this before.
Um, I mean, a while ago, one of our learning points was, getting your QA reservation in early.
mhm,
I think that was back when it, they were backlogged with
mhm,
QA reviews and whatnot. But HITRUST has seemed to do a pretty good job with that over the last year or two, I'd say.
mhm. Yeah,
Um,
it's much better than it used to be. I mean, one of my first submissions about a decade ago was it took 4 months to get a decision one way or the other,
yeah,
and it went. I mean, it was just ages, and they were completely
wow,
slammed.
yeah, wow, yeah, and that, with a 3 month timeline, it's like that can really um,
Hmm.
hurt some organizations in terms of what they're telling their constituents for these reports.
Right.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, there's
having an opportunity to react to them. Because then when you get that final report, at that point in time, the caps were not quite
That's
the
right. Yeah, it wasn't the caps
ahead of time.
before you submit. Now it's nice the
Yeah.
caps before you submit.
Yeah. But at
Yeah.
that point, so then you had whatever High Trust took, they backdated the report to the day you submitted.
Hmm.
So you lost all of that certification time that you paid for, where you couldn't tell people you were certified. You didn't have all of the information you needed to work through corrective actions and that sort of thing. So it was a really interesting. They've made some good changes as far as that goes.
Yeah. No, totally.
Hmm.
Yeah, I do remember because yeah, trying to get people after the fact, a month or two after the fact, for okay, we have some corrective actions, and everybody was like, I thought I'd see you next year. I thought we were
Right.
done with this audit until then, and now
Yeah,
having those corrective actions ahead of time, it was an adjustment the first time going through it that way, but I was like, okay, I see the benefit of that.
for sure. Yeah. I'm curious if you guys have seen or helped anyone go through the AI RMF assessments yet.
I have not. We do have Stephen joins the call every now and then, and I know he just went through an AI, an add-on assessment to their healthcare technology space.
Cool.
Um, but yeah,
How many controls I mean, is there a set number of controls in that? And how many was it for him?
It
yeah,
depends, I thought.
yeah. I
Okay.
don't know. We could have we'll reach out to Stephen and ask him if he can come back and talk about that. Especially
Yeah.
now
Sounds
that
good.
he's gone through it, because I think at the time they had just, it was probably what, March or April, I think he had just submitted it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think similar to like ISO 42K, it depends on what your role is in AI. But it can expand based off of that. So we've got a lot of folks like on the cusp right now thinking about adding that in.
Hmm.
But similar to cloud adoption in the 2010s with in terms of assurance and
Hmm.
attestation, there's not quite the requirement yet that we're seeing from the larger institutions for it. And that
Yeah.
is often what drives the behavior for some of these additional levels of assurance. Um, I attend a lot of the third party conferences um, in our space, and what's interesting is we're seeing, in my opinion, I suppose, that as these new AI requirements are being added into the fold, we're becoming more efficient thanks to AI and agentic AI in
Hmm.
terms of performing assessments. So it's like it's almost coming at the perfect time where we're going to have more to do, but we're also going to be more efficient doing what we used to do.
Hmm.
It's going to
Yeah.
level out to be close to the same.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely add that as a topic. I'll reach out to Stephen and see if we can get him on a week
Yeah,
to talk about his retrospective of the AI, adding that AI assessment on. I think that
Yeah.
would be
And
a good
just
one.
understanding, more about when he's seeing it used, whether it's just for situations where a company um, has a SaaS product or service offering that includes AI, so they
Hmm.
need that part of it, versus the internal systems that use AI. We've talked about things like, the different reports. If you're running HITRUST or information on that could include, HIPAA or PHI components, or things like shareholder data. If you're the CEO's assistant, you're trying to get ready for that shareholder meeting and you have an internal AI system that you say, oh, I just want to, make this really polished and bump it up a little bit. You run it through that. You think it's safe because you've got a log on, and it's internal only. But there's a named list of people who get access to shareholder information before it's published to the shareholders. And by running it through that internal solution, unless it's, flagged and uh,
Lockdown, right.
locked down in different, areas, you've just released it. And there's a lot of people don't understand the difference. And
Hmm.
so I'm wondering whether or not this AI component that HITRUST has is appropriate for those circumstances, or actually does the main R2 need to start picking up some of those things as operational? They don't have an email add-on. Email is
yeah,
part of operational components
Hmm.
that are covered in an
right.
R2. And I think AI, like Chat GPT, login credentials and that sort of thing, enterprise solutions are getting to the point where they need to be included in that kind of thing and not as a separate, oh, and that's AI. That's like saying, do you do marketing? Yes. Do you do social media? Well, that should be part of your marketing strategy. It used to be separate, but it
And hopefully
can't.
Yeah,
that's not part of your operation strategy. Yeah, I do social media
Yeah.
and I tell everybody that I've got this new change request coming. Hopefully it's only your
So
marketing.
right.
yeah. So I look forward to chatting with Stephen some more on that.
Yeah. Yeah, that'll be interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'll be interested too, because my understanding is that you have to establish that role, like AI producer, provider, or customer, which is
Hmm.
similar to right now, like cloud.
Hmm.
Mhm.
cloud service provider or customer, but there's one more level. So that shared responsibility matrix in terms of AI is a little more complicated. And I don't know if that is throttling adoption a little bit just because of how different it is. And everyone thinks they understand AI, and then it adds or adapts and makes it a little bit more.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
the only thing I definitely know about AI is that I know just enough to probably get myself in trouble. Um,
Yeah. Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, great. This has been a great conversation. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah. Thanks for
Thanks
having
so
me.
much, Bill. And
Um,
we look forward to being able to share this video out with our community. So, this will get shared on our YouTube channel and on LinkedIn, and so there will be a lot of folks who are probably catching different snippets of our chat today.
Yep.
no, super. I really appreciate you guys inviting me. I think you guys had some phenomenal questions. Really insightful. I can tell you guys know what you're doing and know how you're doing it.
Hey, thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. If you got value from this episode, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the next HITRUST Secrets. We go live every Thursday at 2 p.m. Central and dig into real-world compliance and security topics. And each session gets uploaded right here after the live show. So whether you're catching us live or on your own time, make sure you're subscribed. We'd love to have you along on your HITRUST journey.